Good afternoon, everyone. I will call this council meeting to order. Joining me in the council chamber this afternoon is our Chief Administrative Officer, Joan Thompson, our clerk, Tatiana Defoe, and our Deputy Clerk, Chris Bantock. And I believe there are many directors that are on the line, and Councillor Ingram has offered her regrets for today's meeting. At this time, I'd ask us just take a moment for some silent reflection. Thank you. I'll turn the meeting over to the clerk, Ms. Defoe.
Through you, Your Worship, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof.
Seeing none.
Item 3 is adoption of the minutes, and there is a motion that the minutes of the regular meeting dated January 11th and the special meeting dated January 18th be adopted as printed.
Moved by Councillor Vasilakos, seconded by Councillor Bunting. Discussion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 4 is adoption of the addendum, and there is no addendum to be adopted. So we'll move on to item 5, report of the Committee of the Whole in camera session. And item 5.1, from the January 11th session under the Municipal Act, a matter concerning the following item was considered, and it was an appointment to Festival Hydro Services, Inc. And there is a motion that Jerry Guthrie be appointed for a 2-year term on the Board of Directors of Festival Hydro Services, Inc. to November 14th, 2022, or until a successor is appointed by Council.
Moved by Councillor Gaffney, seconded by Councillor Beattie. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 5.2 is from the January 13th session under the Municipal Act as amended. Matters concerning the following items were considered. Advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And at the in-camera session, direction was given. Moving on to item 5.3, and there was a Committee of the Whole in-camera session held just prior to this evening's regular council meeting for the following items. Propose or pending acquisition or disposal of land. A second matter relating to propose or pending acquisition or disposal of land. A matter concerning advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, and a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on behalf of the municipality, and a matter relating to personal matters about identifiable individuals. And at the in-camera session, direction was given on all items.
Thank you.
Item 6, hearing of deputations and presentations, and there are none scheduled. So move on to item 7, orders of the day. Item 7.1 is a resolution regarding the downtown traffic study. And the first motion listed is that the presentation of the downtown traffic study by Nick Palomba, Vice President, and Adam Mildenberger, Transportation Planner of RV Anderson Associates Limited, be heard.
Moved by Councillor Burback and seconded by Councillor Vasilakos that the presentation be heard. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. I'll now invite, the clerk will invite into the meeting Mr. Palombo and Mr. Miltenberger, and we'll turn the meeting over to them when they're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, that's great. The presentation slide, okay, it's coming up from your end. Terrific. All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself and Adam Mildenberger for giving us the opportunity to come in and provide you a brief summary of the downtown traffic study that was completed on behalf of the city and the findings of it. I'll try to keep my presentation to about 10 minutes. I think I'm going to run just a little longer when I was looking at my slides, but I'll try to move through it as quickly as possible. Please move on to the next slide. So quickly, overall, the purpose of the downtown study was to analyze intersection operations and look at pedestrian crossing safety within the downtown core of the city. We wanted to identify opportunities for improvement and develop some recommendations around these opportunities for consideration by the city. In our overall study approach, a big part of it was collecting good data, and that data was collected both from a traffic perspective, getting new traffic volumes through weekdays and Saturdays. This was all done in 2019, pre-impacts by COVID, and also was supplemented with a series of other data involving a lot of field observation of travel behavior, pedestrian behavior, how different things are actually operating in the field, especially on the weekends in the more congested setting. We reviewed collision data for the last 5 years, And we focused also on pedestrian crossing opportunities along Downing Street. And we had a few cycling facility feasibility reviews that we were asked to consider as part of the study. Next. Our overall study limits was bounded by Ontario Street on the north, Waterloo on the east, Church and St. Patrick's on the west, and St. David Street on the south. There's a total of 23 intersections. That was a combination of signalized and unsignalized intersections that we looked at and assessed in one form or another. Next. High level, there were 4 corridors. The Ontario Street corridor, today, there's really no significant capacity concerns. There's operational issues today in terms of the turning traffic, but capacity was not necessarily an overarching issue. As part of the study, what we looked at was a horizon year or a future year of 2030. And what we did is we forecasted traffic to that year to determine how the intersections and roadways and how all of this would behave and respond under those levels of demand. And what we found, especially Ontario Street corridor, because the lack of left turning lanes, that we started to see a lot more delay in queuing that would accumulate within the corridor. When we look at the corridor, there's a number of limitations in terms of what you can do. I mean, it's a built urban environment, you really not limited, but you really don't have an opportunity to widen the roadway unless you're going to trade off that space for something else. So we did look at a few options. We looked at reducing through lanes to introduce left turn lanes to better accommodate the delayed and turning vehicle. And that really, from a capacity standpoint, didn't result in a viable solution. We looked also at the elimination of on-street parking. As undesirable as it was an option. And again, not recommended for the main reason as the parking is required in the downtown and is one of the main reasons, one of the main supporting features for the businesses. And the other part is the heavy pedestrian volumes, which impede turning movements. But again, we have to put priorities on things. The pedestrians are a big part of the environment and they do need to be accommodated. So what we tried to do is focus on how can we better accommodate pedestrians. And we looked at, in a lot of areas, there's long crossing distances where the pedestrians are exposed to traffic as they cross. And that exposure also means long signal timings for them. So we looked at opportunities to shorten the crossings. We looked at opportunities to modify signal timings at your signalized intersections wherever possible. And we're also suggesting a monitoring program for your corridor traffic signals, a regular review every 1 to 2 years at a minimum, or if there's something significant that happens, something a little more frequent. The Waterloo corridor, right up into the year 2030, we didn't find that you would be experiencing any capacity concerns. So from an operations perspective, there really was no recommendations there. Next slide, please. Erie Street, the main intersection on Erie, obviously not including the Ontario intersection, was the intersection at St. Patrick's. We found that under 2030, we'd start to see some longer queuing of traffic, but with the modeling we did, we've shown that with adjusting the signal timings, that can be accommodated and that issue will go away. So no geometric modifications again required. And the Downey Street corridor, there were no significant operational concerns all the way to 2030. We have the intersection at Wellington, Albert, and Downey, which is what happens in the longer term as it is today. Traffic on the side street, Wellington and Albert, does face delays trying to enter or cross the street because of a combination of the volume on Downey and also pedestrians. The intersection's not at the point of requiring signalization. It would be about the only solution for the area, but the short distance between this intersection and the Ontario Street intersection would make signalization not really desirable. So we're not recommending improvement, but we're recommending a monitoring of this. I mean, the delays are getting higher, but overall the intersection still operates at a good level of service. So it's just a level of inconvenience for traffic wanting to enter down. And then I touched on this just a moment ago, is a practice for the city to take on a revisiting and monitoring of signal timings, every 1 to 2 years. And as I say, when there's a significant development or redevelopment in the area where travel patterns might change, it's always good to stay on top of that. And what that would require is undertaking some regular traffic counting at your signalized intersections. And then staff can utilize that data to determine whether the timings are best, are coordinated the best for traffic at that time. Next, please. So I'd like to do now is looking at all that analysis. We did collision analysis, field observations, traffic capacity. We've developed a series of modifications at a series of key locations. So the first one I wanted to talk to is the Ontario Street at Church. You can see from the diagram, and obviously you're very familiar with the intersection. It's a very large intersection. There's a lot of pavement. There's There's a lack of definition out there. We have traffic from Huron turning onto Church at a high rate of speed. That very open geometry also invites a level of shortcutting that happens along Church to bypass the Erie intersection. And for pedestrians, they have very long distances in which they have to cross and they're exposed to traffic. The other thing is there's limited space for amenities and pedestrian space. So what we're looking at here is a definition of that inside radius, that large red hatched area. That'll become the new curb line. All that space there will become pedestrian space. It also eliminates the lanes from here on, start to split from 1 to 2 lanes in that section. And what's happened based on the collision experience there's a lot of sideswipe collisions between vehicles as they start to separate into the 2 lanes. This design keeps them into 1 lane until they cross Church, and then the 2 lanes develop. The other element that we have is a bump out on the southeast quadrant of Church Street. That's the bottom right. And again, what we're trying to do there, increase pedestrian space and shorten those crossing distances for pedestrians. Next slide. Moving to the east from that intersection, we're taking a similar approach here. What we're looking at on these quadrants is wherever there is surplus space. So on the north side of the road, that's the Lakeside Drive side, we're just taking back some of the additional pavement. There's some very generous lanes out there, and we're trying to take that space back, provide it to pedestrians, and also shorten that pedestrian crossing distance again. On the south side of the road, we're doing 2 things. At the intersection of Ontario and Erie, we've eliminated the very short right turn lane that exists there today, and we're increasing the on-street parking in that area. The big radius that's there today is to accommodate trucks turning. So what we've proposed here is what's called a truck apron. So you have the red hatched area, which is the sidewalk area raised up, and that other area that's delineated is a lower curb that when trucks need a little bit more space for their back wheels to turn, they turn over that. But for cars, they'll follow the black line all the way around, which will slow down the rate of speed at which they turn, which was another pattern of collisions that was found there between the cars making that right and the opposing lefts turning. The other main element of this is we're shortening that crossing distance across Erie. So this eliminates that median barricade that's there. The median barricade has, from the review of the collision experience, we found a number of references to poor visibility of pedestrians coming off of it. So this would eliminate that. And the last part for this intersection is the lanes coming northbound on Erie. And if you want to go straight through the lakeside, they're not aligned today. There's a jog. So this will provide a proper alignment and leaving the area going to the right turn lane onto Ontario against the curb. The hatched area that you see next to the right turn lane will accommodate trucks if they need to make a slightly wider turn and make their maneuver onto the street. The last piece that this one is focusing on is the short section between Downey and Erie. There is a very short right turn lane there. We're suggesting removing that, again, providing more pedestrian space. And the reason for the right turn lane being there, I think, was just more from similar pavement width. It doesn't really provide a big benefit or a function to the overall road operation. Next slide. This is a short one. Ontario Waterloo. Ontario Waterloo, there are a number of accidents here related to parking, side swipes, also involving pedestrians. So same thing on the west side of the intersection. We'd like to pull the curbs out so that they are just inside the parking areas. What that'll do, again, it'll allow the pedestrians to stand out on the curb and be seen beyond the parked cars by approaching vehicles, and also give them a shorter exposed distance to cross. On the east side or right side of the intersection, we have additional pavement width there. I believe on the south side there was on-street parking that was eliminated, and on the north side it's just some additional pavement width. And we're suggesting, again, get that pavement back into the pedestrian realm and align the curb line so you have a more balanced flow of traffic through the intersection. And again, you end up with a shorter crossing distance for people crossing and walking across Ontario Street. Next, please. So on Downey Street, we looked at providing pedestrian crossing opportunities, and we've identified two. This is the first of two. So this one is at the intersection of George and Downey. What we're recommending there is, again, some curb extensions, which you see. The curb extensions will accommodate the vehicles that have to make the turns, but also, again, bring the pedestrians out beyond the parked cars, try to provide the best visibility to them before they step out onto the road. We are recommending, and you can see in the top left corner of the diagram, this is called a PXO. It's a type 2 level, a level 2 type B. It has buttons on the poles on each side. So if someone approaching will push the button, you'll get the rapid flashing lights on both sides of the road. And we've also shown this with the arms, with the signs that hang over the road. And the reason we've done that is, again, you have parking on both curb lines, and we want to make sure there's good visibility for the traffic that they are coming up on this particular feature. Also with this one here, we were able to add 1 to 2 parking spaces on Downey Street in front of the Avon Theatre. So this one ends up with a little bit of additional parking as well. Next slide. Moving down Downey, we looked at the intersection with Douro, St. Patrick, Downey, and Waterloo. There are a number of intersections within the town, the city of Stratford, which have intersections meeting at very skewed angles and issues of traffic, both making their turns, but also having good visibility, being able to turn your head around to decide whether there's traffic, there's a gap in traffic to complete your turn safely. At this location, there were a number of issues that were highlighted through a review of a lot of the collision reports. At the intersection of Douro and Waterloo and Douro and Downey, that very short section which we're showing as being eliminated, there's the building on the corner. That building contributed to a lot of sightline issues, and there was really no solution to better that problem. What we focused on is ways to change the travel pattern and to get more standardized treatment. So the recommendation is this elongated offset intersection where Waterloo comes straight out to Downey, comes in at almost a 90-degree angle. Durrell Street ties into Waterloo as it does today, but then stops there. We introduce and extend the green space that's there with a much larger area taking back that short section of Durrell. And on the St. Patrick side, same thing. Instead of bringing St. Patrick in at a very skewed angle, we're trying to bend it around and bring it in as close to 90 as possible. With the increased separation between the two, we're able to show a turn lane for both St. Patrick and for Waterloo, and just simplify the decisions that someone coming out at St. Patrick's has to. They basically now have to look north and south and make their decision, as do Waterloo traffic. They're not concerned with what's on the other side and the angles. The impact for this one for parking is on the section of Waterloo that was closed. That is the bottom green area. There is some on-street parking in front of the vacant parcel of land and also the church and the other two small buildings. We're relocating that parking to Durrell Street. So there's no loss of parking. The church parking would originate in front of the church on Durrell. And also there is a small loss of parking where St. Patrick comes in to Downey. Because of the left turn lane, there's 2 to 3 parking spots. They're the ones that are right near the word street on Downey Street there. They'd fall right in the intersection, and those two would have to be clawed back. Next option. So this is at Milton and the transit terminal. This also is our second location where we're proposing priority for pedestrians on top of other things. Currently, with the exiting traffic from the transit terminal, we know that they're completing most of their maneuvers based on courtesy gaps provided by traffic on street. It's not the most desirable solution, and as traffic continues to grow in the future, probably will not be the safest solution. What we've looked at here is a mix of uses here. We have the transit terminal, we have the train station, we have the skate park, and just the overall recreational facilities in the area. And we also know now that people using the recreational facilities are crossing over to the transit terminal to use the washroom. So between the pedestrians generated by the terminal and what's there, plus with the recreational, we thought this would be the other ideal spot where we could provide a priority to the transit vehicles through a full signalized intersection. And that full signalized intersection would have pedestrian push buttons and accommodations on all 4 approaches, which would then again provide access, controlled access for pedestrians and cyclists. The major roadway change here is we're recommending that Shakespeare would be cul-de-saced. However, the pedestrian sidewalk and cycling accommodation from Shakespeare out to Downey would be maintained. And we recapture some land and create some green space and some amenity area if the city wishes to do any type of parkette or celebration area or gateway feature. There's no on-street parking reductions or changes of this, and the overall intersection operation and the corridor will work at a very good level of service. Next option. We were also asked to look at cycling and the possibility of incorporating cycling. One of the areas we were asked to look at was Erie Street. If I can ask you to click on, next slide, please. So Erie Street right now is a 4-lane road with on-street parking on both sides. The 4 lanes are narrow in nature, but they do work given the fact that there are 4 there. Click again. The bike lane options, we looked at 2. One is leaving everything as it is, the curbs, all the features, taking away 2 of the travel lanes, maintaining parking, and then adding a bike lane with a painted buffer separating the bikes from the parked cars, just to provide some safety around door openings and those types of maneuvers. Click again, please. The other one was looking at a cycle track, which what we did is you can see we've pulled the curbs in. So the road looks the same, 2 lanes plus parking, but we put the bikes on the outside where there's separation between them and the cars, and they'd be cycling off-road along the corridor. Next slide. So key to these accommodations would be to determine whether or not we could bring Erie Street down to 2 travel lanes of traffic for the near future. So what we did is we looked at 2030 and 2035 to take a look at whether 4 lanes could be reduced to 2, and this major facility would still operate at a reasonable level of service. What was determined was that at 4 lanes as it is today, all the way up to 2030 and 2035, the roadway is still going to operate at a good level of service. It's not going to have high level of delay. It'll be able to accommodate parking maneuvers. So as people are parking, you can still move around in the second lane and things of that nature. In the 2-lane scenario, what we determined was by 2030, the road would be at about 90% of capacity, which is what we refer to as about a level of service E. And by 2035, it would be right at capacity. And what you would experience here is you would experience bumper to bumper traffic. Travel time would be really inconsistent. When there are parking maneuvers or people wishing to park or turn into driveways, it would shut down the road from a flow perspective, increased delay. With this being such a significant road and also a connecting link in the truck traffic, we determined that, and we're recommending that the reduction from 4 to 2 lanes not be implemented from basically the section just south of Ontario to St. Patrick, which was the section we were asked to look at. Next slide. We were also asked to have a quick look at Lakeside Drive. As part of the master plan, there was an interim recommendation to explore whether Lakeside Drive east of Waterloo could be converted to one-way operation to accommodate cycling. Staff had asked us if we could look at extending that one-way section west of Waterloo all the way down to Ontario. So that's the section highlighted in yellow. What we did again is we identified the traffic that currently uses that section. We looked at what that would be today and what it would be in 10 years' time, 2030, and how that traffic would then complete its trips. And that's represented by the red lines you see there. And we did a series of scenarios. Some that traffic would get split between Waterloo and Ontario, some that would go on Ontario using Downey, Erie, or onto Huron, all based on where their original trips were going. And what we found was that with the addition of this traffic to Waterloo coming down to Ontario, the section of Ontario, including the Waterloo intersection, the increasing number of turns at all these intersections and the lack of turn lanes there would break down the intersections, creating well, it would create congestion and queuing that would extend back through the intersections. Again, what we found was there isn't enough capacity on the roads to take this additional traffic. So we're not recommending that this particular section be considered for one-way conversion. And next slide, please. The last corridor we were asked to look at from cycling perspective was looking at Waterloo. Waterloo, we looked at two plans there. One was providing accommodations on street, and we also did a quick review of what leaving the street as it is and trying to provide something behind the curbs. Generally, Waterloo, it ranges from about 8 and a bit meters up to 11 meters. It has 2 lanes for the most part. It has parking on one side of the road. It does alternate. And the first 2 blocks where the signalized intersections, we have some additional turn lanes. So to introduce the bike lanes, we would remove all 11 on-street parking spaces. We'd have to remove the turn lanes at the signalized intersections. And in a few spots where it is narrow, we would have to widen, and there's a bit of tree and utility impact at those locations. The scenario where we looked at full off-street cycling facility, given the number of mature trees on that stretch, we just didn't feel that that was a scenario that could be considered viable. It would just change the character of the road significantly. So again, for this particular corridor, we didn't find a method to provide a dedicated facility. It doesn't eliminate the ability for cyclists to use it, but we didn't find a scenario that we felt was viable because, again, removal of on-street parking, the premise we've been working with in the study was the on-street parking is a key element within Stratford, and a significant removal of it would not be something that was be considered viable. Next. I know I've gone pretty quick. I just like to open it for questions, and maybe I can spend a little bit of time on elements that members of council might have questions about.
Sure. Councillor Clifford, then Councillor Henderson, Councillor Vasilakos. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to ask, I get a lot of calls about people going down Erie Street, turning left onto Ontario Street, and the traffic backs up. And it isn't in here anywhere. Is there a way to solve that problem with people turning left onto Ontario from Erie?
Yes, so this would be turning left onto Ontario to go to Huron?
That's correct.
Okay. What we tried to focus at that particular intersection was the challenge. One of the challenges you have with your traffic signals is because you do have a lot of pedestrians, you have to accommodate the time that it takes them to cross the street and the volume. That whole premise, that storyline that I talked about, shortening those crossing distances. When we do that, that provides your traffic staff the ability to take those seconds of green time and give them to other movements like an advanced green for a turn. And that's how we are proposing to, at many of the signalized locations, provide an increased level of operation by redistributing that green time that we free up by, we're not rushing the pedestrians across the street, we're actually shortening the distance they have to cross. So by doing that, then that time can be redistributed. But in terms of a significant change to that, I'm going to say it is a limitation of that, the amount of green that we can provide, and the method would, and I think I'm talking in circles here, I apologize, but the method would be focused on freeing up green time to give to those problem movements.
Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, I see on the one by the transit terminal on Downing Street, the idea of having a cul-de-sac at Shakespeare Street there. And I wonder, like, so people that are coming in or picking people up at the train station and that, is there an alternative for them to be, other streets to be crossing to? Or is there a possibility of making it more of a curve on the other side of that green space, and then they could turn left or right onto Downing Street? I'm just concerned about how that would work there. I mean, I like the idea of making it safer for, shortening that and making it a green space there, but since that is our train station, and I think that, I'm not sure, the bus goes along there. I'm just wondering how that's going to work out.
Yeah, we did consider what the impact of closing Shakespeare would be. The volumes the traffic volumes we saw at Shakespeare and Downing were very, very light. What we thought was that they would continue to use the Milton Street, making use of the traffic signal, and then they would travel back, I think it's to Nile, and come down to Shakespeare. This, if you're going to consider a road closure, this would usually have this study would be done as an environmental assessment, and at that point, I think you would put this out to the public and get the public input on what they would feel. Because obviously any additional traffic on Milton or Nile, people that live on Milton or Nile may see that as a negative. When we looked at the numbers are very small. So we thought it could be something that could be, well, the roadway can accommodate it, and we didn't feel that it would be an overly negative received by the residents. But as part of this study, we did not do any public consultation. So I'm only speaking from my perspective based on the numbers.
And then it would be, the lights would be operated by the bus drivers. How do they work?
No. So what would happen with this would become a regular traffic signal. So in the pavement, there'll be loops. When the bus drives on top of it, it will change to green. If a pedestrian walks up and pushes any of the push buttons, it will change for them. If someone on Milton pulls up, there'll be a loop in the asphalt in Milton, and that will call the signals around to the side street. And the rest of the time it would sit green on the main road.
Oh, okay.
So we call that a semi-actuated signal, where it doesn't sit and just continuously cycle. It just gets actuated when there's a need.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really pleased to see some of the improvements for pedestrians, especially around Church Street and where the school is. And there's a lot of really good options here for us. I had a question around, so we don't have a lot of options for improving cycling safety through some of those intersections. And specifically, I'm thinking on Erie Street. If, would there be an option to maintain the 4 lanes for traffic and include a cycle track if that on-street parking were to be accommodated as off-street parking? Because we have a couple of lots in quite close proximity to there that could be upgraded to either tiered parking or additional parking. I only say that because I know that on-street parking is really important, but at some point, if we can move some of it to off-street parking, could we then accommodate cycle tracks? I don't know if that bike lanes are appropriate on that stretch of Erie simply because of the kinds of traffic that go along there, but could you accommodate cycle tracks if you move some of that parking off of that stretch?
The short answer is yes. And I also agree that on-street bike lanes on that stretch would not be if you were going to provide a facility for cyclists would not be the right way to do it. The parking lanes right now is about 2.5 meters. So if you were to move the curb in, you would capture 2.5 meters on one side. If you wanted to do it all on one side as a bidirectional, and you'd end up with 2.5 meters, which is good. Between 2.4 and 3 meters is what you'd like to have. Or you could, and again, whenever you think about narrowing the road, the cost is obviously an implication because you are changing curbs and other things. So one way is just narrow one side and have it as a 2-way. The other one would be to bring in the curbs on both sides and have a cycle track on each side. And then you just have to decide which side of the road you'd want to keep on street parking. But the short answer is yes, from the mathematics and the space and the right of way width, it's there. It just, we didn't feel based on how important parking was that we wanted to put that forward as a solid recommendation that parking should be removed for an entire stretch. But from a community decision perspective, those are trade-offs that definitely can be achieved.
Okay, thank you. And I guess more on that track, like it's the idea of as we improve parking, could we just keep that on the back burner or something for staff to consider in the future? And the other, so given that a lot of the sort of busier intersections don't include improvements for cyclists necessarily, would your recommendation be that when we redo the bike and pedestrian master plan to come up with safe routes through downtown using alternative access points to downtown?
Yes, I would say when you look at the street pattern, the downtown, your main intersections, the heavy pedestrian volumes, you do have notable truck traffic as well because of the connecting links. And that's where Waterloo is not a bad road for it. It's a trade-off between on-street parking and other elements. So there are options. But yes, I think as you update your transportation master plan and your cycling master plan, probably as part of that, that should be the focus. And then within these pedestrian areas, we've identified a number of areas where we can recapture pedestrian space and amenity area. Again, cyclists will travel the busier roads, but providing amenities for them to park safely and secure their bikes is also an opportunity that these recaptured spaces can be leveraged for.
So you mean like those little green triangles, like as you could put things like bike parking in those areas? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, all of those areas, like at main intersections where you have, like at Erie and Ontario, you have that corridor has your largest pedestrian volumes. There, you want to make sure you have enough sidewalk space that people can cross safely. But there's a lot of other areas we've recaptured where there's going to be surplus space for cycling racks, or I don't know if there's a need for lockers yet, but definitely racks. And then we've been able to identify a few areas you could recapture as green space, and what you do with those areas: a rest area, bench, seating area, again, some cycling racks. I think there's a lot of opportunities from an urban design perspective. We've tried to provide more of a canvas for you. We haven't really gone into what you can do with the areas, because that really is a vision put forward by your community.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So Burback.
Thank you. Yeah, my question actually just follows directly on what you were discussing. So the recaptured green space and possibly pedestrian bump outs, for instance, at Downey, Duro, and St. Patrick, or where Shakespeare Street is, could there be a cycle path accommodated so that we can direct cycle traffic through an area that cars wouldn't necessarily be able to go to? And I think you probably answered that already.
Yeah, the short answer, yes. Especially there, when you look at Duro, Waterloo, that area, you could definitely create a cycling link through the green space to allow access to the roads in behind.
Right. And the other spot I was wondering about was the Huron, Ontario, and Church. There's going to be a very large pedestrian bump out there. I know that we aren't planning to have cycle lanes on Huron, which we're going to discuss later in this meeting. Mm-hmm. However, I think that might be another opportunity to put a cycle track that would sort of steer cyclists to the side streets rather than onto the main, onto Ontario Street. So in other words, coming in front of the courthouse, sort of directing cyclists to go onto Church Street, as opposed to continuing around the corner onto Ontario, where there's no real space for them. So just a thought on that.
No, and you are correct. That's another large area, and Church Street would definitely be a corridor as an alternate that you would like to direct cyclists to. So doing something like that, taking them off the road as they come along Huron, which they'll be cycling just in mixed traffic, and bringing them through that area. So that definitely is a valid and probably a very solid use of some of that space. Great,
thank you. And I did have one comment about Erie Street. Is we do have the existing parking there, which is just ground level. Pulling out of that parking lot can be a real challenge when cars are parked along Erie. I find as a driver, when I'm pulling out of there, sight lines are really bad because of the parked cars along that stretch. So I think Councillor Vasilakos' idea of perhaps eliminating that parking would actually make it much safer and easier to get in and out of that parking area, because right now I find it really challenging.
And you're correct. And a lot of the concepts of the bump outs that we're showing is we're bumping the curb out so a pedestrian will stand out beyond the parked car and be seen by approaching cars. Unfortunately, when you're in your car, your bumper's there, you're sitting 1.5 meters back and don't have the benefit of it. So eliminating the parking at any intersection within the downtown will always improve those sight lines. What we generally found, though, is we didn't, the areas where we did find collision experience related to sight lines, they're addressed in these treatments that we've put forward. Not saying that there's not a lot of other areas, but what the two suggestions of eliminating parking and the issue of entering the road and being obstructed are both ones we've identified as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for the report. I think it was really good.
Councillor Ritzman.
Yes, thank you. And I'll echo that last comment by Councillor Burback. An excellent report. I would like to go back to the Ontario Erie Street intersection.
Okay.
And just coming up, I believe it's Lakeside Drive as it comes west up the hill and where it aligns directly with Erie. I believe there's a left-hand turn there onto Ontario. Does that impact traffic flow? I know I've had complaints about that left-hand turn as people come up the hill, trying to turn, facing Erie, trying to turn left onto Ontario. Was that looked at all?
Again, this would be turning left to go towards Huron.
No, turning left to go to up.
Oh, sorry, coming on Lake.
Yes. So you're facing Erie Street. You're coming up, you're facing Erie Street, and then you're turning left onto Ontario.
Okay, from the lakeside.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a left turn lane there.
There's not a left-hand turn lane, but there's left-hand turning available.
Oh, yes.
And it seems to back everything up there. And I'm just wondering whether there was any discussion or data with regards to eliminating that left turn at that spot altogether, and just allow people to turn right or straight through just for traffic flow.
We did look at elimination of certain movements, and you've caught me on that one. I would say we probably did look at this one because we also looked at eliminating the left coming from Ontario and turning left onto Lakeside. Again, it's not a high volume movement. We thought, what if you restrict those movements and then they would turn into, they would make their maneuver. I'm just trying to, I think it's York Street.
Yes, that's correct.
That runs in behind, yeah, having them turn there. So we did look at combinations like that. And those types of things are very easy to do. They're operational in nature. It's some signage and adjusting the signal timings. I would say at your Ontario, Erie, Lakeside intersection, anything you could do that reduces turning maneuvers. So if that maneuver is very light, that would benefit the operation at signal. And to the earlier councillor's request about the left turn coming from the other side, that
Exactly.
time can be flipped over to the more predominant movements. So those are community impact issues where it really is a business, well, I won't say business impact, but people do get a little defensive if they have to go a different way. So it would be a communication issue, but we can definitely even look at that and provide Ed Dulovic a comment on that. But I know we looked at a whole series of modifications to, could we reduce the complexity of these intersections and the movements they have to accommodate to make it work better?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Gaffney.
I'll move the staff recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. A seconder for that. Councillor Burbeck. And the recommendation is the Stratford Downtown Traffic Study outlining the key findings presented by RV Anderson Associates Limited to receive for information. Is there anything further? Councillor Henderson and Councillor Seven.
So the next step would be staff will come back with, the next step would be staff coming back with first steps and how much each section would cost.
I will turn that over to Mr. Dulovic, who's on the screen.
Yeah, to your worship. Yes, so what will happen is that this will now be what we'll use for future improvements and future capital budgets going forward. For instance, you know, when they talked about the closure of Shakespeare, that will involve a public process because that's a fairly significant intersection improvements there. So a number of these considerations would say go back to the public. Some they wouldn't. They'd be very minor, you know, such as some of the bump outs and things like that. That would be something that you'll see in the future capital budgets, and it'll be up for councils to say, yes, let's include that. We have enough money to do those type of things. So it varies as to what the work is and how much, whether we have to go to the public or not. But what I see here is probably a multi-year implementation of those recommendations. Some can be done sooner than later. I think one of the priorities, and may even be in this year's budget, is for the pedestrian signal on St. George. That's been talked about for a number of years now. We had previous studies that recommended it. It's been recommended again, and I think and we've heard from the public on it too. So I see that as being a priority. So a number of things that will happen over the next several years to implement what's there, and it'll give the council of the day the opportunity to comment on it as well.
Thank you. Councillor Sebin.
Thank you. Yeah, that pretty well covered. I just wanted to make sure for people watching that they know that this doesn't approve all the measures there, and certainly some may go ahead, some may not, but there'll be discussion down the line regarding them.
Great. All right, seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Palumbo and Mr. Miltenberger. Next item.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Through you, Your Worship, returning to your agenda, item 7.2 is a resolution regarding an update on draft plan of subdivision 31T19-001 and zone change application Z09-19 for 236 Britannia Street. And there are two motions listed for consideration as follows. The first is that the correspondence from Bonnie Lindsay dated January 10th with respect to the draft plan and zone change application be received.
Moved by Councillor Vasilakos and second by Councillor Burback. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
And the second recommendation is that the report on draft plan of subdivision and zone change application for 236 Britannia Street be received for information, and that the planning report on the draft plan of subdivision and the zone change application be presented to council for consideration when discussions between the developer and the residents have concluded.
By Councillor Clifford and second by Councillor Gaffney. Discussion. If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Next item.
Item 7.3 is a resolution regarding the gas tax letter of agreement, and there is a recommendation that council authorize the entering into of a letter of agreement dated January 14th with Her Majesty the Queen and Right of the Province of Ontario as represented by the Minister of Transportation for funding under the dedicated gas tax funds for public transportation program for the 2020/2021 program term.
Moved by Councillor Henderson and second by Councillor Vasilakos. Discussion. Councillor Vasilakos.
I had just a question, maybe if staff knows, how does this funding allocation compare to other years?
Either Mr. Delovic or Ms. Baroness would know.
Yes, through your worship, this is provincial gas tax, very similar to what we received last year. We usually receive between $450,000 and $475,000.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there anything further? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you.
Item 7.4 is correspondence regarding a resignation from Heritage Stratford, and there is a motion that the resignation of Derek Smith as the alternate SABA representative from the Heritage Stratford Advisory Committee be accepted.
Moved by Councillor Burback, seconded by Councillor Bunting. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 7.5 is a resolution regarding the Huron Street Reconstruction Road Preliminary Design Report, and there is a staff recommendation that the report on the Huron Street reconstruction be received for information, and that staff report back to the Infrastructure, Transportation, and Safety Subcommittee after the conclusion of the open house.
Moved by Councillor Vasilakos and seconded by Councillor Burback. Discussion. Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just after reading the report on the downtown and what the representative said from RV Anderson, and looking at the design being proposed for Huron Street, would it not be facing the same eventual traffic volumes as noted in RV Anderson's report, that the long-term use into year 2025 to 2030, are volumes of traffic going to be of a volume that it's going to be bumper to bumper like the consultants were noting on the turning Erie Street into a two-lane road or two-lane highway? Thank you.
Mr. Dolovic?
Yeah, through your worship. There is a difference here. They were talking 2-lane operation. This is a 3-lane operation. So by having that center turn lane, it allows for vehicles that need to turn into driveways, et cetera, to pull into that center lane and still allow the flow through traffic to go through. So there is, and as noted, you know, that type of configuration is good for up to 20,000 vehicles per day. They don't see hitting that horizon in 2030. There's a lot of benefits also with it, with increased visibility, less collision points that are possible. We talk about in the report where conflict points, there's a lot less. And so it's a much better, it's a much different operation, 2 lanes versus the 3 lanes. And as noted, it's something that the MTO has looked at it, they understand it, and they're not opposed to looking at this. There's a lot of benefits as noted in the report by going with this 3-lane option.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Councillor Burbach?
Yes, thank you. I'm curious if the this 3-lane option was looked at for Erie Street. I don't recall seeing that as one of the options. It strikes me as a good solution because they suggested 4-lane and then they suggested 2-lane, but having 3 might be that compromise that we need.
Through the chair, I in this on Huron Street, we're not introducing bike lanes, so they were looking at it as part of a bike lane a process. So that's where the difference was.
Right, thank you. Just one note about the bike lanes too. I totally understand why they wouldn't be added along this stretch of Huron. I'm wondering if there could be a consideration for some kind of bike accommodation over the bridge, because I see that as the only point. As a cyclist, that's a point where you can't avoid. You have to go over the bridge. Would there be a possibility to put some cycling accommodation, say between Douglas and Church Street on the southbound side, and between York and Mornington, basically to funnel cycling traffic onto the parallel streets to get them off of, keep them off of Huron, keep them off of Ontario Street. So it's something I would really like to see at least examined. And it's just it's a short strip, but it's a pinch point, as we call it, and it's a real challenge for cyclists. And we want to also make sure we keep cyclists off of the sidewalks because that's not safe for pedestrians.
Your worship, yeah, staff will have a look at it. It'll all be dependent on the width that we have there of pavement, if we can accommodate the proper cycling routes.
Thank you. All right, anything further? If not, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 7.6 is a resolution regarding the Social Services Relief Fund Phase 2, and there is a staff recommendation that council authorize the mayor and the city clerk and the director of social services to execute the contribution agreement for the Social Service Relief Fund Phase 2 holdback with the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing as required for the purpose of establishing the city's obligations to use the funds in accordance with the SSRF program guidelines for the construction of 8 modular supportive housing units at 398 Erie Street, Stratford.
Councillor Henderson moving, Councillor Bunting seconding. It's discussion. Councillor Henderson.
So do we know when the open house will be yet for this?
Through you, your worship. This is a project that's still pending approval with CMHC. We should know by the first couple weeks of February if we are approved. At that point, we will come forward to council and look at an open house.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, your worship. Are we restricted in size here? Like, is 8 the maximum amount of units we can do, or is there a possibility for future development on the same site if it's needed?
Through you, your worship, I will address that with the manager of housing, but I do believe we did have that reviewed.
you.
Through your worship, it has to do with the zoning for that site at this time.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Thank you.
Item 7.7 is a resolution regarding heavy truck restrictions on Foreman Ave, Fraser Drive, Matilda Street, Oakdale Ave, Orr Street, and Short Street. And there is a staff recommendation that Schedule 12 heavy truck restrictions of traffic and parking bylaw be amended to include the following roads: Foreman Avenue between Short Street and Orr Street, Fraser Drive between McCarthy Road West and Foreman Avenue, Matilda Street between Oakdale Avenue and Short Street. And for this next one, there is an amendment. It should read Oakdale Avenue between Olone Ave and Matilda Street, Orr Street between McCarthy Street West and Foreman Avenue, Short Street between Olone Avenue and Foreman Avenue, and that the restrictions be for any time.
Councillor Gaffney moving, second by Councillor Vasilakos. Discussion. Councillor Henderson.
So is there signs put out at the beginning of the street to say no trucks, or how does that work? I know there's one on West Score, I think.
Mr.
Your
Glover.
worship, yes, where we have heavy restrictions in place, we do put up signage. We've had signs ordered. I'm hoping that they'll be delivered this week if this is approved. And we'll put them up quickly temporarily and then get them mounted permanently if council does approve it. But the signage does, there will be signs going up, and I'll talk to staff about maybe putting a new tab on it too, where it says new, so that people are aware that it is new.
Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are permanent signs necessary, or is it just until the construction is done? Because I look at the list, some of the on some of the other streets on the other bylaw, and they certainly don't have permanent signs installed saying heavy traffic on all of them.
Through your worship, when I mean permit, we'll have the proper posts and all that. I mean, this could be long-term. Yes, there's the work going on with respect to the servicing of the one subdivision, but you also have trucks going in when they're digging for basements and things like that. So what's been happening is that, as I've noted in the report, the trucks are using that as a shortcut. Even though we've talked to both developers in the past about having trucks go, take the longer route, they do, and then after a while they'll revert back to taking the short route. So these signs could be up for a couple of years before they come down.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you, if you're building a swimming pool in any of these streets or building a new garage, is there, like, do you have to contact the police if you're going to do that, or is that an exception that's okay?
Through your worship, as noted, that is an exception. So if you are going to say on Short Street, or let's say on Fraser, and you're putting in a pool, and that's where you're going, then you're fine. You're exempt from the bylaw. And it'll be just like any other type of delivery that would be going to someone's home, a large delivery truck, a garbage truck, etc. They're exempt because they're actually servicing a property that's on that street that has the restriction in place. And that applies to all of our heavy restrictions throughout the city.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
I just had a quick question out of curiosity. Do the mapping programs and the Garmin type things, do they include, like, for trucks, like, do they include information on restrictions and things like that? Like, some of them will indicate what the speed limit is, but do those programs, are they sometimes incorporated into that? I think that would be for, like, out of town.
Through your worship, I do not know. It was something we would have to look into.
Thank you. There's nothing further. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you.
Item 8, business for which previous notice has been given and there's none scheduled. So moving on to item 9, reports of the standing committees. Item 9.1 is a report of the Planning and Heritage Committee. And there are 2 items listed, and they both relate to the January 2021 Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review Update.
Moved by Councillor Henderson and seconded by Councillor Burbach. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you.
Item 10, notice of intent, there is none scheduled. So move on to item 11, reading of the bylaws. And there are 5 bylaws listed for consideration as follows. Item 11.1 is appointment to Festival Hydro Services Inc. Board of Directors. Item 11.2 is to adopt the 2021 budget. Item 11.3 is a letter of agreement for dedicated gas tax funds. Item 11.4 is the contribution agreement for the Social Services Relief Fund Phase 2 holdback. And item 11.5 is to amend the traffic and parking bylaw regarding the heavy truck restrictions. And we will note the amendment will be made to that one section.
Mover that they be taken collectively. Councillor Beattie and Councillor Bunting. Councillor Henderson, saw your hand.
Yes, on 11.2, I would just like to have, for anybody watching to know what the actual increase for the taxes is.
So we'll do that when we get to first reading. If we, okay. Councillor Seven.
Thank you. I had the same comment as Councillor Henderson, and I just also wanted to comment that I just wanted to reiterate my concerns about the Saturday on-demand transit that will be starting, because it is sort of part of the budget. I just wanted to reiterate my concerns about that, and then I'll let Ms. Baroness speak to the increase when it's appropriate.
Thank you. All those in favor of taking the bylaws collectively? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. So we'll go to first and second reading. Councillor Clifford and Councillor Ritzma. And at this time, I'd invite the Director of Corporate Services, Ms. Baroness, to make a brief remarks about the budget and the overall tax increase. Ms. Baroness.
Yes, through your worship. So the overall increase, if we compare the 2021 tax bylaw to the 2020 tax bylaw, is 2.02. If we consider the assessment growth in 2020 that came in after the 2020 bylaw was passed, that assessment growth carries into the future. If we add that to the 2020 bylaw and take that into consideration, our increase is 1.33%.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Baroness? If not, I'll call the first and second reading of the bylaws. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Third and final reading of bylaw 11.1 through 5, Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Seven. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you.
Item 12 is a consent agenda. Are there any items listed on the consent agenda to be considered by council?
Councillor Ritzma?
Yes, I'd like to consider 2021-007, the resolution from the Township of Glengarry in support of Bill 156.
Seconder for that motion. Councillor Gaffney. Discussion. Councillor Seven.
Thank you. I just want to speak against the motion. I have a Humane Society International Canada has a stance on this, and they do very much oppose. And I'll just read a little bit of the reasons why. So the bill represents a wholesale assault on many fundamental values shared by the people across Canada. Aspects of the bill would infringe on individuals' rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, and therefore violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Similar ones have been struck down in several states. The Humane Society International Canada opposes any efforts to reduce transparency with the animal agricultural industry, including bills like this one. And in recent years, multiple undercover investigations on Canadian factory farms have exposed horrendous acts of animal cruelty, some of which have resulted in criminal charges. We firmly believe that federal, provincial, and territorial governments should do more to animal welfare standards on farms instead of penalizing whistleblowers who expose animal abuse within the industry.
Councillor Vasilakos.
I think we've already had, this has come across our consent agenda previously, and I'm going to speak against it as well. One of the reasons why is it's an unnecessary bill that feels to me political, because there are already actually enough laws on the books to allow for the kinds of protections that they think they're doing with this one. So it feels political. And the other aspect of it is at the same time that this bill has come forward, we've been waiting for quite some time for the province to take action on things like puppy and kitten mills, and they haven't, and they continue to function. If you look at Kijiji and a number of other animal welfare bills that and regulations that we should have that we don't. So I really do not see at this point that we need something that actually reduces transparency rather than actually increases transparency on what happens on farm.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? 4 are opposed. The motion carries. Next item.
Moving on to item 13, are there any new business items?
Councilor Burback.
Thank you. Yeah, I had somebody contact me yesterday to ask whether once COVID-19 restrictions open up a little bit, would the city be willing to clear some ice on the river for people to skate?
Ms. Thompson or Mr. St. Louis? I'll let Ms. Thompson take it.
Sorry, if we could take that back and we will report back to council once we've had a chance to discuss it.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Anything further? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn to reconvene in Planning and Heritage Committee, followed by Infrastructure, Transportation, and Safety. Councillor Sebin and Councillor Beatty. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. And we can reconvene in Planning and Heritage. And I believe the acting chair for this will be Councillor Ritzma.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I will call the Planning and Heritage Committee to order. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interests? Seeing none. Item 3, delegations. There are none scheduled. Item 4, a report of the Manager of Planning. Item 4.1, Planning report, zone change application Z03-20, and the address is 533 Romeo Street South. And I believe Mr. Bannon's available to give a report with regards to the staff recommendation. Mr. Bannon, are you there?
Yes, I am, and I'm just going to set up our report or presentation.
Thank you.
Great. So the property is located at 533 Romeo Street South. Application is Z0320. Baker Planning Group, on behalf of MP Booker Assets Incorporated, has requested to change the zoning from a general industrial I2 zone to a general industrial I2 special zone, and to provide parking at a rate of 1 space for every 50 square meters, and to add an athletic training facility as an additional permitted use with a maximum floor area of 4,080 square meters. The subject lands are located on the east side of Romeo Street South between Park Street and Norfolk. They have an approximate area of 11 hectares and a lot frontage of 248 meters.
Excuse me. Your
Yes.
presentation isn't showing up.
I don't believe he's giving a presentation. I think he's just giving a verbal report.
Oh, I thought he was showing
You have a PowerPoint that I'm trying to share the screen, so let me just try it again here.
Mr. Defoe or Mr. Bantock?
There you go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Bonnie.
So the requested zoning would allow for an athletic training facility as an additional permitted use with a reduced parking rate for the subject lands. The subject lands are located on an existing public transit route, and full municipal services are provided to the lands, and the additional use is not expected to have a negative impact on the surrounding industrial operations. The city's official plan has establish permitted uses within employment areas and permits the proposed use, as it would not preempt the development of lands for industrial purposes. The proposed use would be located within the existing building and would have a maximum floor area to limit the size of the athletic facility. The lands are designated industrial area with a range of permitted industrial uses, including manufacturing, assembling, wholesaling, and storage of goods. The city of Stratford has recently completed an annexation of 320 acres of land to allow the city to remain competitive in attracting new industrial development. The city would have concerns, and staff would have concerns with any conversion of employment lands to non-employment uses. In this case, the proposal represents the utilization of a portion of the existing building for the athletic training facility, and the use is not considered to preempt the ultimate development of the lands for industrial purposes. The proposed zoning specifies the maximum size of the use, and any future requests to go beyond the maximum area would be subject to a future planning application under the Planning Act. The area used for the athletic training facility could be easily converted to another permitted industrial use in the future, and staff are of the opinion that the proposed use is in conformity with the official plan. The lands are zoned general industrial I2, and it requires parking to be provided at a rate of 1 space for every 80 square meters for an industrial use and 1 space for every 100 square meters for a warehouse use. The applicant is proposing a rate of 1 space for every 50 square meters for the athletic training facility. They are proposing to limit the size of the athletic club to 4,080 square meters, which results in a requirement to provide 82 parking spaces for the athletic training facility. The planning justification report states that the operating hours for this facility would be primarily in the evenings. This will provide additional parking spaces for overflow parking as a business operation. Open times are offset. Based on the maximum occupancy and size of the facility, the hours of operation of the businesses, and the transit route, the proposed parking rate would be sufficient to provide adequate off-street parking for the subject lands. We have received agency comments, and most of these comments were brought up at the public meeting. Building services do not have any concerns with the application. They noted that they did not apply for the original building permit, and they were asked to discontinue work on the property until the zone change was approved. Engineering services also do not object to the zone change. They've noted that a road widening and a sidewalk will be required through the site plan application. Transit Division and the Township of Perth East also have no concerns. Upper Thames River Conservation Area has no objection, and Invest Stratford is not opposed to the commercial use cited in the application, but they do note that if additional space within the building is available, that they're strongly encouraged to consider small, light industrial uses that complement industrial and commercial uses on the property. We have sent out the notice to the public, and we have received 1 letter from the Stratford Pickleball Association, who is in support of the application. Planning staff are of the opinion that the site-specific zone change to an athletic training facility as an additional permitted use with a maximum gross floor area and a parking rate is considered to be appropriate for the use of the lands, and it will limit the intensity of such use that will have minimal, if any, impact on the industrial area. The zoning bylaw amendment would be consistent with the provincial policy statement, is in keeping with the official plan provisions, the intent of the zoning bylaw, and is considered to be consistent with the city's strategic priorities and represents good planning. And I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bannon. Any questions from council? And I can't see all of council. If I could ask the clerk to maybe remove the presentation. Any questions? Seeing none, Councillor Clifford.
I will move the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Clifford. Seconder, Councillor Beatty. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Moving down to item number 5, I will entertain a motion for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Bunting, seconded by Councillor Burbach. All in favor? And we're adjourned. Thank you, Your Worship.
Turn it over to Councillor Vasilakos for infrastructure, transportation, and safety.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will call the Infrastructure, Transportation, and Safety Committee to order. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest for the general nature thereof? Seeing none, item number 3 is delegations. We have none scheduled. And item number 4 is report of the project engineer. And 4.1 is for a noise bylaw exemption for Lake Victoria footbridge replacement. Mr. Julovic, did you want to just briefly go over the reason for the need for the exemption?
Yes, through the chair, as noted in the report, the equipment's required to provide heat for the concrete that's being poured as part of the rehabilitation project for the bridge. As noted in the report, the equipment is not very loud. It does generate some noise, equivalent to a residential dishwasher, although not on. We have approved a similar exemptions for similar type equipment on other projects in the past, where we've even been closer to residential properties, and we've not received any complaints with respect to the noise being generated from this type of equipment at this sound level.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any questions? Councillor Burback and then Councillor Seven.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a quick question about the bridge itself. Is it going to be wider than the current bridge design?
Through the chair, yes. I'm just trying to go to my memory. It is quite a bit wider than the current one. It'll safely, I think it's well over 3 meters if I remember correctly.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Seven.
Thank you. I just had a question regarding the exemption going from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. if I'm reading that right. And Mr. Julovic, you mentioned that there were no complaints in the past. Was it also that they were working sort of very late and into the early morning that there were no complaints, or was it?
Through the chair, yes, because our noise bylaw allows this to happen from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So we're looking for the overnight. And yes, we've had this equipment operating overnight in other locations. So what it is to provide the heat that's necessary for the work.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, there is a staff recommendation. Moved by Councillor Gaffney, seconded by Councillor Burback. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you very much. And item number 5 is adjournment. Moved by Councillor Clifford, seconded by Councillor Bunting. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Vasilakos, and council will reconvene, and I'll turn it over to the clerk.
Through you, Your Worship, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest stated at the standing committee and to be restated at the reconvene portion?
Seeing none.
Item 15.2 is for the committee reports, and item 15.2.1 is from the Infrastructure, Transportation, and Safety Committee, and that is to consider item 4.1, the noise bylaw exemption for Lake Victoria footbridge replacement.
Moved by Councillor Vasilakos and seconded by Councillor Burback. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried.
And through Your Worship, it's my understanding the final item listed for consideration is the confirmatory bylaw.
Thank you. The confirmatory bylaw could be read a first and second time by Councillor Seven and Councillor Beatty. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Third and final reading is Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Ritzma. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. And a motion to adjourn this afternoon's proceedings. Councillor Vasilakos and Councillor Burback. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Stay safe, everyone.